do good work for it and get paid for it. Like, well, you can't beat this. It's going to vary for each person, is to try to find a connection to what you're doing. I've heard people, of older generations say, well, they're not loyal. I think that's ridiculously unfair because loyalty has to go both ways. Your firm should be acting as if every single person is a flight risk. We tend to forget how much the profession has changed since we've been in it. And instead of getting worried about technology, I think we need to find ways to embrace it and just integrate it in, because that's how the profession will keep expanding and moving forward. If I'm a person in the profession, it's gravy either way, because I'm a hot commodity.
Welcome to CPA Transformation Podcast, where innovation meets insight. I'm your host, Jeffery Cronin, Chief Strategy Officer at Zenwork. Join me as we consider the forces revolutionizing the world of accountants, bookkeepers, and professional tax preparers. Get ready for thought-provoking discussions and invaluable insights brought to you by Tax 1099. To watch and listen to more episodes of the CPA Transformation Podcast, visit cpatransformation.com, or you can visit our YouTube channel at Tax 1099. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. Welcome to the CPA Transformation Podcast. I'm Jeff Cronin. Our guest today is Calvin Harris Jr. Calvin's the CEO of the New York State Society of CPAs. He's got over 30 years of successful management experience and leadership experience. He's been recognized in multiple years as being one of the top 100 most influential individuals in accounting. And he's worked for organizations as diverse as the National Urban League, the United Nations Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Legal Services Corporation, and many others, more than I could probably list at this point.
Yeah.
He's considered an expert in accounting, business, and leadership, and has been quoted and interviewed by Wall Street Journal, Inc. magazine, Forbes, Black Enterprise, Accounting Today, Ebony, and many others as well. So we're really happy to have you here today, Calvin. Calvin is a CPA. He's licensed in New York and Maryland. And Calvin, I'd like to start off by asking you a little bit about, can you tell us about your journey that brought you to being, the CEO of the New York State Society of CPAs? How did you get here?
How did I get here? And first, Jeff, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to always talk about accounting. So I'm glad to be here. My journey to accounting admittedly began as a child, because my mother, my late mother, was a high school business, math, and typing teacher. I'm not sure there are that many typing teachers in high school, but she was one, as well as business math, which is essentially bookkeeping, and we can get right down to it. And I was one of those precocious, we'll call me precocious, perhaps annoying kids that would actually read textbooks for fun, which sounds a lot nerdier once I say it out loud than it felt at the time. But I convinced my mother to bring home textbooks, and I learned how to type before I was 10. And I read business math books for fun. And it really connected to me because I actually fell into that stereotype of being one of those people who was good at math. But in the business math book, I saw dollar signs attached to it. Now that was really exciting for a kid. And that really got me started. And I took high school bookkeeping, and then I knew going into college, I wanted to be a CPA. Fast forward to, graduating from college, I started at Arthur Andersen, so big five at the time, accounting firm. Had a fantastic experience and was there a number of years. And while I was there, I realized how much I enjoyed being in the not-for-profit space. Some of my clients at Andersen at the time were nonprofits and colleges as well. Well, as it turns out, one of those colleges hired me in Baltimore, Morgan State University, and I became a controller there. And fast forward over a bunch. You look back at my career, you'll see a combination of auditing, forensic accounting, consulting, and then controller and CFO roles, overwhelmingly in the not-for-profit and higher education space. It's that role, the last one I had before CEO, as Chief Financial Officer of the National Urban League, that brought me here to New York. And while I was in that role, call came for this role for New York. My predecessor had retired after a really strong and noteworthy time. And it wasn't something expected, to be honest, but it ended up being a really good fit for me because I'm a CPA, just like my members. I am very passionate about the profession and the opportunities that it can provide. And in this role, I get a chance to have so much influence and impact on the profession that's done so much for me. So it's been 2 years as of our recording time here, but I absolutely love the role, and I love the accounting profession.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, that transition into, I guess, well, one, you're not a native New Yorker, so you made your way to all right. I assume you're actually in Manhattan, right? I mean, that would be
as of right now, sitting here at the moment,
Yeah, that's a big change even from Baltimore.
It is, but here's the thing. So like I've admittedly, as you mentioned, CPA Maryland for who knows how many years. So I grew up just outside of Washington, D.C., and I've worked in both Baltimore and D.C., but all in Maryland. But every single person I knew from here in New York that happened to be in Maryland or I chatted with before I came up here, they all said, Calvin, you're going to fit right in. And I know now that they meant that in ways good and probably not so good because despite not being a native New Yorker, I've certainly been here long enough to know that I can't claim that. But I am certainly not a tourist, and it feels like home. So what's the phrase? You can make it here, you can make it anywhere. So
yeah,
it's definitely a demanding place, but there's honestly no place like New York.
Yeah, having never lived there, I'm a Chicago boy, right? So
just a small town.
Just a small town. Yeah. So I mean, so that transition, right? So you mean you worked your way up through through public accounting, and then into nonprofit. So when you look at that transition, how does that experience shape the way you look at your position today, your view of the profession? I mean, how is it different to work in nonprofits and higher ed versus, if we've got some people on the line here who haven't been through that cycle?
Yeah. I think the big thing is the mission focus is that, one thing, and I still slip from time to time, but you'll rarely hear me call an organization like that a nonprofit. I'll either call it a not-for-profit or a charity association or NGO, anything other than, because I think even the usage of that terminology sometimes fools people into thinking that they're actually not trying to make money. They're absolutely trying to make money. Yeah. Every time I was a CFO, I had a strong desire to make as much money as I can. The end result was just different. Instead of money going out to shareholders or dividends or private investors, such as it is, the money is by definition going to be recircled in to help continue the mission of the organization. So that part of the focus is different. And admittedly, that's the part that really connects with me because despite loving my experiences at doing forensic accounting and consulting and public accounting at Anderson, I kept finding myself volunteering to scratch that itch of, hey, I want to give back. And that's not to say that organizations like that can't give back. Big firms do amazing work in the community, but it's different. And I once it dawned on me that I enjoyed working in the not-for-profit space, and every strong not-for-profit needs a strong back office. And I get a chance to serve, even if it's behind the scenes, do good work for it and get paid for it. Like, well, you can't beat this. I'm doing good, and they pay me to do it. I would usually volunteer for this. So I think once you shift the mindset of where the focus is, by definition, then it's not terribly different. The debits and credits still have to equal.
Yeah, I think that's a great lead into a conversation around all the conversation we have. I'm going to use a phrase that I know that you don't like, which is work-life balance.
Yeah.
How that whole conversation around aligning your time out of the home in the community and working, and how do you align that with your personal values and your personal goals? And I think you just told an excellent story about how that aligned for you.
Right.
What's your thoughts about that? Well, I mean, let's be honest. Not everybody feels like they have that option. So let's talk a little bit about.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And admittedly, I do try to avoid the phrase work-life balance as much as work-life integration. But in the end, we're all talking about the same thing. How do you get it all to fit together? For me, it's a lot easier when I'm doing work that, even though it's my job, it connects with me on a personal level. So, being CEO is nowhere near a 40-hour week job. That's just not the way it works.
Right.
But no pun intended, but at the same time, because of the connection I have to the job, a lot of times it doesn't feel like work, even when it is. So I think it's going to vary for each person, is try to find a connection to what you're doing. And as cliche as it sounds, and it is cliche, but it doesn't mean it's not true, if you find a way to connect with your work, then it's more than a job. And I think that the concern ends up being when someone doing their work, their paid job, they aren't to find a way to make that connection. I've met tons and tons of people that are exceptional at what they do in the profession, but it just doesn't make them feel good for whatever reason. And that's no knock on the firm or the job. It's, it just doesn't connect with them. And it's easy for someone that does feel the connection, say, well, just find another job. I mean, that's easier said than done. A lot of times there are real reasons why people just can't do that. So what I end up suggesting, and what I've strived for, because not every job connected with me as well as others, is try to find the connection when I can, is to try to make it balance when I can. If you're not feeling the connection to the job, then I would be extremely intentional and very protective of my individual time that will create a real separation between the work and the non-work. With so many people, and the pandemic obviously put us well on the other end of that, with so many people working remotely in some sort of way. I'm in the temporary space of the society while we build out a new headquarters, but there's just me and one other person here, because that's the norm right now. You don't necessarily require staff to be in there, but it's blurred the lines so much that it's hard not to worry about the mental state or just how people are working together in these situations. So I think it's going to vary for each person, and you want to try to connect as much as you can. And sometimes that unfortunately does mean asking yourself, am I in the right role for me? Is it my best fit?
Yeah. When you talk to people, especially people coming up early in their careers, how do you advise them to seek that right place, that right role for them? I mean, I would guess, going into a large public accounting firm gives you a broad scope of opportunities in order to see what might be a good fit. I'm just curious how you would talk to someone coming into the profession today.
Yeah, it's tough. Now, in this role, I certainly have a lot of opportunities to talk to younger professionals, early stage people, even people who have changed over from other careers, as well as students. And I try to pretty consistently talk about the virtues of connecting with an organization on a way beyond the pain. So that it doesn't feel transactional. And, sometimes it feels transactional because the firm or the company itself makes it so. And then maybe it's not your right place to be. And sometimes you got to make hard choices on whether you want to stay a place or not. The last time I spoke to students, I actually counted out the number of jobs I had since college. And I think it got to 14, which, if my former college advisor was hearing me say that, he would be horrified. He said, "You're giving terrible advice." I said, "Well, maybe it wasn't." each move had its own reason. But the truth be told, I think in some ways, I'm not suggesting people just leave each job willy-nilly. But I think this generation that's entering the profession, particularly on the younger side, they're coming into a normal, a gig economy as the normal, a side hustle as the normal, additional thing they do as the normal. So I've heard people, of older generations say, well, they're not loyal. I think that's ridiculously unfair because loyalty has to go both ways. Yeah. But I think what I generally tell younger people is, do the work. Sometimes you're going to be in a situation that will not be good. Please be realistic, because there's not a provision. I've not seen any profession exist to where there aren't tough times. We may complain about how bad, rough, like busy season might be in a particular firm or organization. Every profession has bad and busy times. Don't let that be your judge, but find a way to connect. And if you're not feeling it, you owe it to yourself to be in the situation that's best for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And that whole connection, we complain about tax season, we complain about audits, year-end closes, depending on where you are.
Yeah.
And it is a situation where, I even, like my late teens, early 20s children have this conversation with them on a regular basis around, hey, if you didn't ever have any hard times, no one would pay you to do it.
I'm going to steal that phrase. That's a good one. I completely agree.
And so, I mean, that's it's tough because one of the things that I think that when we talked earlier, we talked a little bit about how some of the that separation for those of us of a certain age, those of us born in the 60s and 70s, let's just say,
there you go.
That whole idea that work and life and normal day-to-day life were different was baked in to our understanding of
more true. Very true.
And one of the things I've noticed with my younger colleagues is that separation is much more permeable than it ever was for us. And it feels healthier to me.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it is healthier in there. Now, what that does mean in many cases, and this is where I'll hear colleagues and firms and leaders complain, is that, well, that's made them leave here and leave there. And I tend to believe in, I'm certainly not the first one to say that. I'm probably paraphrasing what I've heard from others, that, if your firm should be acting as if every single person is a flight risk. Do your best to treat them appropriately, treat them fairly, pay them fairly, and they'll make the decision. If you've created a positive environment, they generally will stay. Subject to offers they simply can't turn down.
Sure.
But if the firms do the right thing, and if the organizations do the right thing, you'll still lose some people, sure. But I think people, where I see organizations doing that, where I see firms that are doing it, because a lot of firms are doing that, they don't get enough credit. They see positive results. You'll see people that will stay at organizations much longer than one might expect because they're connected. They feel that connection. They feel that community. And that's the positive part of that flexibility and permeability that the younger generations have, that when they do connect with an organization, even if it pays them, they are in. Yeah. You'll be hard pressed to find a more loyal employee.
Yeah, I before I was at Zenwork, the last job I had before this one was at a HCM company. And one of the things that we do in the HCM space is measure reasons for leaving. Yeah. When you have, the HR software world, HR technology world, we have regrettable employee churn is the phrase we always used.
Gotcha.
And what you find in the research there is that over 2/3 of people are leaving their boss. They're not leaving their job.
Yeah.
And when you see the data on that, when you actually do external data, and we're doing exit interviews with people who didn't work for us, right? We had 1,000 customers that we were doing interviews with their employees as they left.
Yep.
And it's really drives home the point that this is in your control, and it's not about them, it's about you.
Yeah, that is such an important point. That is such an important point. Now, if I think back to my own career, I'm in certainly a different generation than the people we're talking about. But there are 2 points in my career where the person that hired me, actually more than two, but there are 2 that are coming to mind immediately, where the person that hired me in this senior level role was not the person that stayed there the whole time. One retired, one transitioned, and so on. And one place in particular was one of the best experiences of my career, and was also one of the most challenging experiences of my year. It was the same exact place, but what was different was I had a different boss in each case. So I completely agree, because even when I think of that organization, my feelings about it will differ depending on what years we're talking about, because of who I was reporting to. So you're absolutely right. People tend to leave the boss, or not. Those of us who are in that boss role, when someone does leave, sometimes there'll be opportunities for us, not just railing against the person that left, but say, okay, is there something that we could have realistically done? Or is there something that I should have done? And, that ends up being the time where we will have to hear that tough feedback. But if we're leaders, we find a way to suck it up, so to speak, and just try to take that feedback and try to act on it.
I think it's an excellent point, that every time, like every other experience, if you view an employee that you're unhappy with leaving the organization as a failure, it's an opportunity to learn. It's not.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
And so you look at in the profession, to change direction a little bit, right? So as these newer folks are coming in, and those of us who are a little bit more on the graybeard side of things are, when you look at the pace of technological change to the profession, some of us lived through, desktop PCs to internet to cloud, and now we're moving to AI. Yep. How do you see that working for young professionals and for firms, and as that continues to expand?
I got to see. I see this technology piece, and the question. I honestly think that's the part that's the most exciting, and that admittedly makes me pretty darn envious of the people that are coming into the profession. If I think back, so I mean, heck, just what 30 years ago, essentially when I entered the profession, I began the profession writing on green bar ledger paper with multicolored pens and pencils. A ruler was extremely important. And of course, I had a calculator because I needed to add and subtract. By the time I left Anderson at, at that 3.5, 4 year period where you say, okay, should I be manager? Should I not? You make those decisions. So you always had that influx of people that live. I was one of those people that left. But by the time I left, you had a lap. The worst case is that if you didn't have a dedicated laptop, you had the computer labs that you were basically going to work for. The idea of even writing that much on paper had gone down quite a bit. If you were writing, you were probably doing because it made your supervisor or your partner happy to kind of see the paper they could reach on, or for your own comfort because you felt more comfortable touching it. And that was just 3 years. The thing that so many of us that are on the, let's say the gray beard, because there's a little bit right there. If I had hair, you'd see that was gray. But we tend to forget how much the profession has changed since we've been in it.
Yeah.
New York, the CPA credential began here in New York, right here in New York City. But back then, we were less than a decade into having electricity. So I would imagine those first CPAs, when they barely were getting used to having electricity in lower Manhattan, I'm going to guess they didn't have calculators. I'm going to guess many of them didn't have pens. They certainly didn't have computers. The profession had changed. We got more efficient, we got more effective, and the world didn't end. For those who are thinking that anything is going away due to AI, I think they are so wrong. It is hard to fathom. But what someone said, well, I think accounting will change as we know. Absolutely. It always has. Every time there was something new, we found new ways. I think this is why I'm so excited about the younger folks. They're going to think of ways of using technology that those who have slowly gotten used to technology will have a hard time. They're used to having devices in their hands in the classroom. So the idea of doing major strategic and analytical work on the fly is something that's going to be they're used to. They did it in school. But what that means is that some of the things that someone like me began doing a career with, which was normal back then, where you would do, taking in time, basically adding and subtracting, making sure that the reports add up. You would print out a report, the final audit report, and you would hand add it. I mean, no one would ever do that. But and it's had its place. And I'm not saying it didn't fit back then. You of course wouldn't dream of doing such a thing now. But what that means is the more dreary and admittedly boring, but still required things they don't have to do now. That means you get to jump into the profession. You get to get strategic quicker. Forensic accounting is a major. It's been for a while. It's major. That's really exciting and interesting stuff. To where, and instead of getting worried about technology, I think we need to find ways to embrace it and just integrate it in, because that's how the profession will keep expanding and moving forward.
Yeah. So, I mean, to summarize what I think I heard you say, like the mechanical compliance components will be automated.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, of course.
Right. Yeah. And that whole process frees up time for you to go do something. I mean, I didn't even realize that forensic accounting was a major.
Yeah.
Right. And
see, funny enough, when I first was doing forensic, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No.
But when I was first doing forensic accounting, I had to describe even the CPAs what I was doing. And I usually would say fraud. And sometimes it didn't involve fraud at all. But everybody understood when I said, I'm looking for fraud. I wasn't. More often it was royalty disputes, which weren't fraud. But now a student can choose that as a major, which makes perfect sense, because one of the benefits I found, particularly when I did the forensics work, is the ability to think creatively, not get so tight and this must work this way, because that's how you tend to find things, is when you kind of let go of your preconceived notion. Well, who better do that than a person that's newer into the profession?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would say, I'm going to go back ages ago. I did a presentation to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners in Calgary.
Yeah.
I was surprised that you could get, 30 people in a room this is the late 90s to talk about, fraud audits. That whole forensic accounting idea was, the step past identification of fraud examination. Right. So, it is great to see that kind of opportunity, because nobody I talk to in the profession joins because they like to actually, balance the ledger. That's not why they're there.
No.
We just need a TV show, I think.
Oh boy, this could be a whole conversation of itself. So I was talking with a colleague of mine. The State Society just recently launched its own podcast, and what we were talking about, and we got on a long story about Ben Affleck and the accountant, which I've actually seen recently. So I was like, actually, that was forensic accounting, and I was like, oh wow, I can actually see what they're doing. They had good consultants, and also the Untouchables, where the accountants were actually a hero. Unfortunately, only one got through it. The other one, we don't really know what happened. He testified on the stand, and then he magically disappeared after testifying against Al Capone. But let's think good thoughts for him. But those end up being two examples where the accountant was the hero. But otherwise, you're hard pressed to think of us.
Yeah, I think that's it's funny. I always forget about the Untouchables, and being a Chicago guy,
right.
I think I
hit a nerve, right?
We're used to, we do know, as my uncle used to say, the laborers union knows where Jimmy Hoffa is. Nobody else does.
No one else, right?
When you look at that whole process of portraying our profession as something that's not just, to be fair, having seen the movie, the portrayal wasn't all that great, other than the fact that he got to be the hero and find the way to get Capone.
Yeah. I mean, of course, he was a little slumpy and frumpy.
Yeah.
If there were pocket protectors back then, I'm sure he'd have had one. Good.
Affleck was a little bit more...
Although he did have the pocket protector.
He did.
And weaponry. Who would have thought a pocket protector and a silencer would go together?
Well, the IRS has a lot of armed agents.
That's true. That's true.
So you look at that. So again, right. So you look at the future of the accounting industry, right? Yeah. So you're obviously bullish on the exciting components of it. Yeah. So let's maybe take a slight step back and say, hey, but is there going to be space for as many of us as there have been? Between outsourcing of some things overseas, the application of technology, automating some mechanical tasks, especially for our audience members who may be bookkeepers instead of a CPA. How do they think about addressing that, or coming to terms with the change?
Yeah, that's a fair concern, and even in my mind, I think of it as a TBD, because we have a few things that are kind of going against each other, and I don't think anyone who says they know the answer to this equation. I think I hope they're only kidding themselves and not telling something intentional, because we have a very clear pipeline issue to where there's a significant reduction of people who have been entering the accounting profession, irrespective of whether they become a CPA or not. Obviously, I want them to become a CPA, but in the profession in some way, shape, or form. And there are various reasons for that. There was an excellent report that the AICPA recently put out. National Pipeline Advisory Group put out a report on that. But also there are issues with people leaving it. So we have that. The population simply end up being smaller, even though some schools, I talked to schools recently and said, well, the numbers are actually not that much lower. It's whether we actually get them in. So it's the leakage, as I've heard many people say. But at the same time, we have these technology advances and exceptional software and items that keep getting development, that when we use them effectively, in some cases we don't need as many people. So which is it going to be? Do we have an issue, or maybe we're thinking about it from an issue of how many people we need based on an older paradigm? Or maybe the technology will ease it up, or maybe the technology, even with the technology, we still have an issue. I tend to think it's the latter, but there is candidly, I've seen data that kind of supports a bunch of different views on it. So that is something that to keep in mind. Now, as a bit of a cynic on this, if I'm a person entering the profession, it's gravy either way, because I'm a hot commodity. If I'm coming in as a young or younger CPA, I'm in a great position. It's not necessarily great for the profession, but yeah, that's great for them individually. But where I think it's going to still come down to is that our best bet, in my mind, no pun intended, is to act as if we have a real pipeline challenge, which I believe we do. That even with changes that are going to happen, automation and adjustments here, that because of even with that happening, just the demographics of the world, older people, going away. I'm in that bucket. that it's still going to be a challenge. I think that's the case. So where it still comes to is one of the things you said earlier, still making the profession more appealing. Firms can absolutely take advantage of this by leaning into technology and the people at the same time. While you bring on exceptional technology that helps you be more efficient and effective, also make sure you're creating an environment where people will want to work and stay with you. That's how we get there. I tend to not be a person that believes that any one thing will get us there. There are many different things you'll hear people talk about in terms of how you enter the profession, how you take the exam, number about so on and so forth. You talk about them ad nauseum, and I tend to believe they absolutely have a point until they say, this is the thing that will fix it. Like, well, I don't believe that's the case. I believe there are a number of things that will help us get there. Technology is absolutely one of them. More equitable and inclusive firms is another one of them. High enough salaries, particularly when a person's coming into the profession, absolutely. And I think all those things together will get us to where we need to be. I tend to think, though, that smart people, and I'm surrounded by a ton of them, tend to not ignore a crisis, but for so long. And I think because I think it's a crisis, but I don't believe it's like a crisis that's in the sky is falling, we should just duck and run for cover. No, it's falling to a degree, but we have the ability to fix it. So it's not like it's absolutely had some rough trends, but we have the ability to have the profession grow as big as ever, just by being intentional about it.
So when you talk about that, there's been some recent reports, for example, that the ongoing expense of maintaining being a lawyer is lower than being a CPA.
Yeah.
Your CLE requirements are lesser than your CPE requirements are. Do we think that's really getting in the way, or do we think that's a paper tiger? Is that not real?
I think it has some merit, but I tend to think it's not as real because of this. The options that we have in terms of getting continuing education. When I first became a CPA, the best way to get my CPA to where I was going to be sure that everything would be accepted was one of two ways. Either through my firm, if my firm did all the CPA in-house, or through my state society, and I'll put AICPA in that bucket. It's still a great option, and of course, New York has a very robust continuing education as well. Have to say that.
Yep.
But we realize there are options out there. There are low-cost options that people can lean to. Unfortunately, I do worry that, and I suppose it's a surprise to any profession like accounting, where you have an educational component. I tend to want my continuing education to be something that I'm learning something new, which I always figure was the reason for it. And I realize some people, for whatever reason, sometimes it's time or perceived time, treat it just like a commodity. Let me just get these hours out of the way and keep moving. Well, it doesn't make us better professionals. It doesn't make us there. And when you have that unfortunate mindset, well, sure, I think, you'll be focused on the cost because you just look at the cheapest way to check the box. Checking the box does not make us better accountants. It does not make us better trusted professionals within for our clients. So I do worry that that's the case. And where I hear those comments, at least anecdotally, in terms of the CPE and all that, the cost differential, I tend to hear that coming from people that look at continuing education as a commodity, as opposed to the thing that actually is supposed to make us better for the people we serve. And in my mind, that ends up being investment. That doesn't mean we can't try ways to be more cost effective, but I just don't think I just don't see that as a legitimate reason for challenge to the profession.
Got it. Yeah, if you look at I think it's a really helpful. Everybody has to go through the regulatory update stuff.
Absolutely.
Right. So that falls into the, not every job is fun part.
Yeah.
But absolutely. Your point is that, if you treat professional education as an opportunity to gain access to some of the more areas that are more interesting to you, right? Like we talked about, right? Would you like to be would you like to get into forensic accounting? There's plenty of material.
Any of it.
Which would give you access to a whole new way to grow your career and maybe find that connection that you've been looking for.
Precisely.
So I think that's some great advice. Well, as we come up to the end of our time together, is there anything you'd like to make sure that the audience knows a little bit about you, a little bit about the association? Of course, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about New York. Not all, obviously, only a portion of our members will be in New York.
Of course,
statistically, about 12 or 13%.
Hey, but who's counting?
Yeah.
Well, certainly, I love New York, not just because it's a catchphrase, because it's one of those places where people from all around the world come here. So, despite being the CEO from New York State, which is certainly bigger than just New York City, we've got Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany, very robust areas upstate. It's nevertheless an international city. We'll have colleagues, from India that come into town, and we chat with them, we connect with them. So it ends up being unique in that regard. Now, in terms of my state society, along with other state societies, I always encourage anyone professional, whether you're a CPA or not, to connect with that group, because one of our charges is to protect the public, and that ends up being advocacy work and the like. So we're always excited to have members connect with us. And quite honestly, what helps us be better at serving the public, serving the state, serving our members, is when people get involved. So whether you're here in New York or not in New York, I would certainly encourage you to find an accounting-based, technically CPA obviously, but an accounting-based constituency group to support. It absolutely will not just help you connect better individually. You'll be helping the profession, but when it's in its ideal state, it'll actually make you more effective in what you're doing, and sometimes also will lead to clients.
Good. Well, Calvin, thank you very much for your time today. It's been great, and look forward to seeing you again.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Jeff.
I hope you enjoyed the podcast. You can visit our website, CPATransformation.com, or visit our channel on YouTube at tax1099.com for more episodes, clips, and discussions with industry leaders.